Alright guys, like I said with our latest chapter discussion covering Lady Nagan, right now My Hero Academia is all about the villains both new and old. And although we've already spoken at length about Lady Nagan, there is still of course her newly found sidekick, the once ever insidious villainous mastermind, Overhaul. Overhaul is back and there is a whole lot to be said about his return and what we can expect to see from him going forwards. Now, despite once being one of the most threatening villains in the modern day and nearly capitalizing on the removal of quirks from society, a pretty monumental prospect in hindsight, Overhaul is far from his former glory at this point. That once ever brilliant mind has now been reduced to a debilitating lunacy. The only words he currently cares to utter are related to the old man, the mafia boss that took him in as a child and treated him like a son. This same man being the grandfather of ERI, whom Overhaul placed in an indefinite coma before ruthlessly operating on the young ERI for quite some time. And at the time, he validated this transgression with the sentiment that the end justifies the means. To him, this was the hard thing that as a grandfather the boss could not possibly capitalize on. And so in lacking that sentimentality himself, Overhaul would do what needed to be done and further the power of the mob. But clearly, his plans did not exactly pan out as intended. Ultimately, it was all for nothing as he now has nothing. His actions led to the collapse of the organization in its entirety. As it currently stands, his life's work has been taken and will never be mass produced as intended. Not to mention that without his arms, he now lacks the ability to activate his quirk. All of these contemplations, being had in solitary confinement for months on end, was enough to break the mind of Chisaki. His longing to see the old man is his most base of desires. The old man was his anchor, everything he did was for the boss, and so he longs to have that stability once more. But beyond that, there is also a crippling guilt to be felt as well. He betrayed the person he cares for most and has now effectively damned him to an eternal slumber that he himself can no longer relieve. Again, on account of his missing arms. Overhaul is currently a sad shell of a man that Lady Nagan has taken pity on. However, Lady Nagan did express the possibility of him being useful to her in some capacity at a later point. But with that being said, I don't believe she has anything really thought out in that regard, as she's unlikely to know the depths of his genius and former capabilities. But even still, as an inmate of Tartarus, it's safe to assume that he's remarkably dangerous in some capacity, and so it was a pretty good bet on her part. Overhaul's story has yet to truly conclude, but the question then becomes, what is there left for him? Well, in the immediate sense, with him having been pacified by his own failings, Deku may have an opportunity to better understand him. With intentions of saving Shigaraki from himself, Deku will need some experience dealing with those who've undergone a darker path beyond simply beating them into submission. Such a thing in regards to Overhaul would, in a sense, be the inverse of his prior reunion with Muscular. As opposed to seeking nothing but destruction, violence, and a good fight, Overhaul lacks any such desire. Unaware of his past motivations, such a thing would provide Deku further perspective. You see, Chisaki, like himself and Shigaraki, was a successor that went to great lengths to fulfill the desires of his predecessor, but eventually was made to step out of that shadow and become more than they were previously. And with that, I feel as though Overhaul will be integral to Deku's development in this sense. But even in knowing that, what aid could Deku possibly offer him, as simply incarcerating him once more does not equate to rehabilitation? And perhaps the question then shifts to that of deservance. Does a child abuser and murderer like Chisaki deserve to feel anything more than endless guilt and pain? A moral conflict that I don't care to tackle in this capacity. However, Deku certainly intends to save a mass murderer by the name of Shigaraki, so regardless, he's liable to attempt the same with Overhaul. Now, without his quirk, the only person who could possibly help Overhaul and save the old man from his slumber would be the very child that he abused in the past, ERI. Now, that takes the complication scale to a whole new level. ERI has even less of an obligation to aid such a person. However, in seeing how far he has fallen, in seeing her abuser in this pitiful state, this even pitiable state, perhaps that could provide her a sense of solace and allow her to move on with her life to an extended degree. I don't believe Overhaul should or will ever have his arms restored. But again, the old man is Eri's grandfather and the only relative she has left at this point. Having now come to properly control her quirk, if not for the currently depraved state of the world, I imagine adoptive services would await her. For the time being, she has been left in the hands of Yue, and specifically Aizawa. But he is a hero and one intent on fighting the good fight in this current climate. To follow all these events, many children are likely to be left in the system, which may lead to a bit of difficulty for Eri when it comes to finding a new family. Her grandfather could fulfill that role instead, as he intended to previously. And if you're concerned with the boss being a villain as well or anything like that, remember that when raising Overhaul, he did his best to steer him away from harming the innocent and dealing with drugs and illegal activity outright. It's just that Overhaul was such a damaged person that he continuously disobeyed said wishes. But from there, what is to become of Overhaul then? Well, the danger of the quirk singularity yet looms. This is a crisis we have covered on the channel a number of times, and ultimately, despite his horrendous approach, Overhaul was right to detest the existence of quirks. The potential to rid the world of such a thing could be his purpose in the end. Now, Horikoshi has had some characters do some pretty horrendous things in the past, from petty cases like Bakugo to further child abuse in the case of Endeavor. But as we've seen thus far, he doesn't leave such characters unpunished. They eventually all get what they deserve. And furthermore, many of said cases involve a degree of guilt and repentance, but ultimately it is up to those directly impacted to express forgiveness or not at all. I think Eri could have a situation similar to Shoto perhaps. Right now, she is surrounded by a number of true heroes after having been saved on more than one occasion by true heroes. And so with her still in her prime development period, I'd imagine that such things would positively impact her outlook. It is the heroic thing to do. Perhaps it's unreasonable to most, but that's kind of the very nature of true heroism at the end of the day. Such things can never be forgotten, but being able to move on with one's life is all too important. Overhaul is a character whose true origins are shrouded in shadow, and so there is still a whole lot to be learned in regards to his character in general. So I for one am looking forward to exploring all of that in the times to come. But what do you guys think about all this? Do you even want more Overhaul coverage? Let us know. And while you're at it, subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on to never miss a single installment or conversation, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at PlotArmorYT to stay up to date with all the latest and greatest anime and manga news, memes, and information, because when it comes to bringing you some of the best My Hero Academia content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.